quite noisy in here, actually.
Do you want to step outside or whatever is good for you?
Okay, it's fine. Fine, picking it up fine.
Okay. Testing, how you doing?
I'm testing.
I enjoyed my stay here in London. It's beautiful. The croissant was delicious and the coffee was great.
Yeah.
I hope I don't drink too much coffee and croissants today.
Okay, Bill, so just tell us a little bit about a film which represents your filmography. What do you think is most representative of your work? What was you trying to show and represent with a movie that you like, a particular one?
Well, I actually think I have kind of a schizophrenic filmography. I have movies that I've made that are very popular in Europe, and I have films that I made that are very popular in America. I have films like The Maniac Cop and The Maniac Pictures and Vigilante, which were extremely popular both here and here in Europe and also in America. Then I have films like that other people know about in America, a film called Relentless and another film, Hit List,
which we don't know.
Yeah, which never were really fully distributed in Europe because they were picked up by Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers basically just dumped them on the video market. So I would say for me, the film that most represents, I think the film for me that is the film that will be on my tombstone will be Maniac. And the film for me, that most represents the kind of films I enjoy would be a film like Maniac Cop 2. Which Maniac Cop 2 for me was sort of a throwback to the Republic serials of the 30s. And but I think people would say Maniac is the film, and I'd have to agree that would be the film that would define my career.
And what do you think you were trying to show in Maniac from a filmmaker's point of view? Was there any specifics of what you were trying? Because for a British audience, it shows, well, for me, it shows America a certain side to it clearly.
Well, the intention on Maniac was to make a 90-minute visceral picture. It was intended to be extremely primal. We did not have money for effects or computer effects or any of that kind of stuff. So the film was intended to be a very raw, primal film. And the subject matter being a very American subject matter, which is serial killers, was actually based on a compilation of several American serial killers. And so it is a depiction of an aspect of a very dark part of America, which is the breeding of these types of people. I mean, there's a lot. Maniac, besides being is it too loud in here? Do you want to? Out here at the Institut Français in London on Queensbury Road.
That's right.
And testing. How are we doing?
Doing fine.
All right, good.
Okay, so the first question, Bill, was just tell us a little bit about a film that best represents your filmography and what you were trying to do with that film.
Without a doubt, it would be the movie Maniac. That's the movie that's going to be on my tombstone. That film has defined my entire career, and I made that made that film in 1980, and it's still to this day. I think there's not a day that goes by it's not playing someplace in the world. Anyway, what I tried to achieve with that film was to make a 90-minute visceral roller coaster for the audience, and to achieve that, we chose the idea of depicting a serial killer on the loose in New York City, and it was just after the Son of Sam killings. So a lot of the film was inspired by that real-life serial killer, but also in depicting the character's personal life. We looked into other serial killers in America, like Ted Bundy and who's the guy who was depicted in Henry Lee Lucas? Yeah, people like that. And so the characters became a compilation of different people.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the difference between sort of making the films now that you're doing now and to what you were doing back then? Do you think the main difference is any difference?
Well, I think the main difference is that horror films are very primal films. And as you get older, you become less in touch with some of the primal emotions that you had when you were younger. So it becomes an exercise in getting in touch with that part of your psyche and understanding it in order to depict it. And that's why I think that when you look at the successful horror films, they all tend to be pictures from the early part of a filmmaker's career, like Tobe Hooper with Chainsaw Massacre and so on and so forth. It's always the earlier films because that's when you're at your least guarded. And but I would say it's still the challenge to find stories that are in touch with that part of people's mindset.
So, I mean, do you think that people's interest in the types of films have changed today, and there's not a market for these movies? After all, I mean, we are at a festival where people are obviously coming to see them.
Yeah, I mean, you just look around, it's the obvious. I mean, Scream and Scream 2 are films that was certainly a throwback to the films of the late 70s, early 80s, and people are enjoying them in droves. So I don't think it has anything to do with time passing. I really think it has to do with doing good films, good genre films. A good genre film like Scream will revitalize the genre. Unfortunately, because horror films could be made inexpensively, there's a lot of people that go out there and make horror films that are a bunch of crap. And so it disparages the genre. But when you get good filmmakers like the John Carpenters and the Wes Cravens go out there and make some really good films, I really don't think there is a difference. I think people just want good stories.
What were we've said about the influences. So what do you think generally is lacking in the genre? I mean, do you think there's originality lacking? Or?
Well, it's always been a genre which has been been repetitive. I mean, look, how many Frankenstein films and Dracula films, and you put out a successful horror film, there'll be a dozen imitations within a very short time. I think there is, of course, the lack of originality, but I think because horror films are very basic, it really becomes telling the same story only differently and with different plot twists. But effectively, they become either the dark house story, they become the people trapped in a place story. They become, there's only so many basic stories in the horror genre. So, and that's just because they're ritual films is what I think makes them so entertaining to the audience. And I think that the challenge for the filmmaker is always to recognize the ritual and find ways of putting twists and turns within it.
So, we said a bit about the inspiration of life in America that influenced your movies. I mean, is that something that you continually put in your films, or do you just go for the market and you? I mean, you're obviously market-led and it's a business, we know. But
well, I'm always very conscious of how to market a film before I make it. I don't want to make a film from just my family and friends. And but my tastes are very commercial. So if I make a film for the market, doesn't necessarily mean it's not personal. But when you were saying about
what pressures are what pressures are put on from producers in America with regards to the restriction on the filmmaker, really. That's what I'm asking.
I think the biggest restriction, speaking specifically about genre films, I think the biggest problem in America with genre films is that when they're made in a studio system or even in a small company system, they get put through what I call the committee process, and therefore they become not the personal vision of that particular filmmaker. As I said before, horror films by their very nature are primal, and so they become, in effect, they become conventional by being put through the committee process, because the committee wants to be able to latch on to what they saw recently, either consciously or subconsciously, in order to justify making the picture. Whereas the best horror films have always come from people outside of that convention.
Okay. Well, that's brilliant. And just want to ask a little bit about censorship. I know you can't relate it to Britain much.
Well, I can relate to Britain. Yes, I can, of course.
Sorry.
Yes.
What do you think about, the fact that your movie Maniac is not available?
Yeah. Well, recently there was a company, daring enough, a new video company that starts releasing films, I believe, in August, called Exploited. And the two gentlemen who own Exploited came to me and licensed Maniac. And I said to them throughout the entire process, this movie is never going to get passed. And they said, we're going to try. So they've submitted it to the BBFC. And they have not gotten an official announcement about it, notification. But it's unlikely it's ever going to pass, even with cuts or anything. It's unlikely, just on the subject matter, it will ever pass. I mean, obviously, I'm opposed to censorship. I think that any filmmaker or any creative person would be against censorship, and I think most people are against censorship. I just think it's something which, really, I think censorship is handled by the marketplace. I think if people, I think people, if they don't like something, don't buy it. That's it. You have a decision. We're adults. I do believe, though, in restricting stuff to ages. I don't think it's appropriate to rent Maniac, let's say, to a 13-year-old.
No.
But I don't believe it should not be available to adults.
Yeah. But what do you think about the attitude of censors, where they will spend time analysing a film and cutting out literally seconds every month in this country?
I know, it's ridiculous. I hear about
because based upon some notes that they have in intellectual kind of realms.
I know. It just defies logic. I mean, it's a movie. That's what it is. I mean, taking out a few frames here and there really doesn't matter. It's so stupid. It's so asinine to think that you're protecting society by clipping away frames from a movie. It's just so ludicrous. And I just wish somebody would wake up and just say, this is stupid.
That's what we're trying to show here.
I know. It's just stupid. It's so stupid. It's sad that people waste their time. I also believe that there's been a bureaucracy created, and people have jobs and careers tied to this bureaucracy, and are unwilling to let go of it, as ludicrous as they may deep down feel that it is, or for political and economic reasons, are unwilling to acknowledge this because they're out of a job. And I think it's to their benefit. I think it's their benefit, obviously, to perpetuate and make the parents feel that they're the guardians of corruption to their children, and that without them, their children are going to all be little mass murderers.
What type of censorship? Because it's the censorship in America. What?
Well, they don't call it censorship in America. What they call it is the MPAA, which is a ratings board. Yeah. It becomes an economic censorship because if you get an X rating on a film, it limits where you can advertise it and where it can be shown. So no one wants to get an X rating on their film. Therefore, you do everything to get an R rating, including trimming your movie. Now, they don't tell you where to trim your movie. There's a little game that gets played, and you go and you wind up playing this little game. I will tell you, since we're in England, I do a little trick with them. Oh, watch, there's somebody. Maybe I shouldn't say. Well, okay, I'll tell you, because this is after the fact. What I do with them is when I show them the movie, I already know they're not gonna pass the movie and give me an R rating. It's a slam dunk. You bring them a movie, they're never gonna pass it uncut. Okay, so what I do is I take the movie back, I put the print on the editing machine, and I cut it up and put splice marks, but I don't take anything out of the movie. So the next time they see the movie, they see all these splice marks and all this tape that goes through the projector, and there's all these pops and stuff. So I have never had them not pass it the second time, even though it's the same identical movie that they saw before with splice marks on it. It just gave them, because they don't keep a record, they don't have any means of being able to know what version they saw before. It just somehow, when the stuff goes through the projector with all the splice marks and everything, they think they've cut it, and therefore they've done their job.
That's it, Bill. Really, thanks very much.
Oh, okay.
That's it. I think, I don't.
Maybe filmmakers can use that practice with the BBFC, perhaps.
They could. Maybe they could. Thanks a lot, Bill.
You take care.
That's brilliant.